Ivy Valentine subscribes to Mark Yoon, so should you. Enjoy your treat!
While taking a look at some comments from some of the videos that I've made on guest characters in the past, there seems to be a little bit of confusion that I kind of want to generally talk about and discuss with you guys and try to get your opinion and feedback based on what we're going to say in the video. And I did make a video like this in the past, but I wanted to update it just in case people haven't seen that video, and there's some new things that I want to actually add to it and bring to light. And that is the criteria that Project Soul uses to gauge, to choose a guest character for their games or not. And this is different from every fighting game. They all choose their own guests different ways, and Project Soul is no different. Now, just because they are sometimes aligned with Tekken Team by helping them out like during crunch or like when they need something to get done specifically, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have the same criteria. They definitely don't have the same budget as Tekken Team, and that actually comes into a big factor when it comes to them choosing guests. Now, generally speaking, the best way that you can gauge what a company does with guest characters is by looking at what they've already done with guest characters. And we can see games like Mortal Kombat, they have themes and they can basically choose like whomever they want, and they pretty much have the bankroll from WB and now Discovery Plus actually to get that actual kind of money. And the same can be said for Tekken, though to a lesser extent, because Tekken still doesn't have the budget that like Mortal Kombat does, but they still generally get to choose their characters that they want, which is why there was like a consensus almost that like Noctis, Kellum should have been in SoulCalibur as opposed to being in Tekken because he didn't fit as well, and that's just the way that Harada wanted it, I guess. He wanted, or not he, because he's just a producer, but the Tekken team and Harada at the helm wanted that character specifically for the game for some reason and not be in SoulCalibur, so that's why they choose. But SoulCalibur doesn't have the luxury of throwing around like big D budgets, right? Like they are a smaller team within Bandai Namco, and their budgets are based directly on game sales, which the other games are as well. Now, even though Tekken generally only sells about 1 million to 1.5 million more than SoulCalibur games in general, whereas SoulCalibur usually sells around 2 to 2.5 to maximum 3 million copies for all their games, Tekken actually does maybe around 4 million, sometimes 5, but the last game is like obviously like a much bigger version because Tekken has been out since 2015 in Japan, so Tekken 7 had a chance to actually build upon those sales when releasing, especially in North America afterwards and stuff, but that's like neither here nor there. So they have the budget from their game sales to actually choose whoever that they want to choose, right? But when it comes to SoulCalibur, that's just not the luxury that they have. So what do they usually choose? Now, the exceptions that people bring up are exceptions because of specific reasons. So they never use villains, right? They only use like main characters of a game, and it's never like something from outside media like Mortal Kombat or Tekken may do. SoulCalibur only uses video game characters that are like not in the same genre, but like are at the same level of sales around that they do. So that's why we get characters like 2B and Halmaru from SNK and stuff like that. They don't necessarily have to be within the same company or same bounds of the same company, but they usually use cross-promotion as their biggest tool. And cross-promotion will actually get them deals on licenses for characters. So what it basically entails is like, oh, Samurai Showdown just recently came out and they need to promote the game because the sales aren't as good as they would like. And SoulCalibur needs a guest character to help get people from another genre into their game. Well, Halmaru being in SoulCalibur 6 would actually benefit both companies, thus promoting both games, thus being cross-promoted. And that's a way that they can actually get characters for less licensing, and they can actually utilize both, and they both grow from it. Samurai Showdown will sell more copies, SoulCalibur 6 will sell more copies, and they're both happy with that. Now, when I was mentioning exceptions before, there are exceptions to the rule, but this usually has to come with finances. It doesn't really have to come with choice. So when we see characters like, let's say, Darth Vader and Yoda for SoulCalibur 4, right? That game was promoted, not only promoted by, but it was financed by Lucas Games. This is before the Disney bought Lucas. So they actually were trying to cross-promote their newer game, Star Wars The Force Unleashed, which I think is pretty common knowledge at this point. But since they funded the game and financed the game, that's why that game is so Star Wars centric. It feels much more like a meeting of two worlds, like Star Wars versus SoulCalibur almost, than a SoulCalibur solid mainline title. That's why we have not only stages from Star Wars, but music from Star Wars. We got 3 different characters from Star Wars. We have obviously console exclusive, so like which version you had depending on which character you got, but they were able to purchase on both until the license expired, and now you can't have either because they're delisted. But those characters, based on that, they were in the story mode, like in everything. So I mean, that game was so funded by LucasArts that it was like literally almost a promotional tool almost for getting SoulCalibur fans to purchase Star Wars The Force Unleashed. And in thought and practice, it generally worked. Now, SoulCalibur 4 is a good game based on more than that, especially because of like the graphics, the design of the characters, the gameplay, and the character creation is like really good in that as well. It's not as good as 5, but it's still good. But that's just like something that I wanted to bring up because of that. When we go to everything else, like you see like main characters of a series of a game. They don't do comics, they don't do movies, they don't do pop culture, but you have to look to see what they're actually cross-promoting, because some people will be like, well, hell, Mark, there is Spawn in SoulCalibur 2. He's a comical character. Yes, but they were promoting the Spawn video game. That's a completely different thing. McFarlane was promoting the Spawn video game. They decided to cross-promote and to do Spawn Immortal, I believe it was, for PlayStation 2. And in order to do that, he actually was working with SoulCalibur, so they weren't like really paying for licensing fees for him, because Tom McFarlane also designed the character of Necrid, and he actually owns that character. Well, he co-owns that character, so they can't use it without his permission. So that's just like another like kind of inkling of what happens there. Link obviously is the main character of the Zelda franchise. Heihachi wasn't actually supposed to be the character from PlayStation 2, I'm sure all of you know by now, but it was actually supposed to be Dante from like Devil May Cry 3, but talks fell through like in the last minute, so they ended up going with an IP that they could use for free, which would be Heihachi. So that's why they did that. We see similar things like that all the time, but especially like even in Mortal Kombat, like talks fell through with Ash Williams for some reason. I think it might have had to do with the licensing rights for the game, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But that's why they used Joker last minute, because they already had the pre-existing license for DC characters because of Injustice. So they'll use their back pocket to pull characters out sometimes like that, which is what they did. SoulCalibur 3, we were supposed to have Cloud Strife. Talks fell through last minute once again, so there's actually no guest character in that, but we have pseudo guest characters because there are the Xenosaga costumes where you can create the Xenosaga characters, the 2 female leads. So there's a lot of differences in correlation between how SoulCalibur chooses these guest characters. So the top criteria that they usually use, like I said, is it within a game that sells within the same range that needs help with cross-promotion? That's the number 1 rule. The number 2 rule is it something that they are likely to be able to work with, somebody that will actually work with them within that criteria. And then the third and final is if the license is cheap enough for them to attain, because they have to use their budget in order to get it. So those are the 3 rules that they generally use, which is why you don't see crazy out there characters in SoulCalibur ever. We have, let's say, Kratos, who's only available on the PSP version of Broken Destiny. PlayStation's obviously going to lend them that license because PSP is only going to sell for them. It's not going to sell for anybody else, so you don't have to worry about their license or IP getting out there to people that they don't want it to. We also have The Witcher from The Witcher 3. We have Geralt. Like, obviously they are promoting that, and there's like a lot going on with that game, so they're using that as a promotional tool. 2B. It's the same thing with all their characters that they utilize. There's not really one instance that's an exception unless the game was funded directly by another company, like we see with SoulCalibur 4. Other than that, it's all like regular characters. Now, they don't exactly also use cross-referenced characters anymore. So console exclusive characters, for example, because of what happened between Nintendo and Project Soul with like Link not selling as well on the GameCube version, as well as Nintendo wanted, and you guys know Nintendo, so their expectations are pretty high. So being that SoulCalibur 2 was split in 3 from the player base, like the sales couldn't all be accumulated together. They only wanted to see the sales from the GameCube version of SoulCalibur 2, which I believe the highest sold version was the PlayStation 2 version. Even though I bought all 3 and I played the Xbox version mostly because of Spawn, but I did have the GameCube version, but they had a little, not really a falling out. They just don't work together as much because Nintendo took a chance and let them license their character, which they are very strict with, and the sales weren't in their favor, and they didn't really do anything to promote really like Zelda beyond people that were already Zelda fans, if that makes any sense to you. So after that, Project Soul literally came out in an interview, I think it was, and said that like they're no longer going to be doing console exclusive characters, which I think the only exception to that rule would be Kratos, but that's only because that game is only available on PSP. It's not available on other consoles, so it's not really console exclusive. And that also goes to say the same with SoulCalibur 4. Those characters were made available to the opposite console, so they're not technically locked to that version. If you had the PlayStation 3 and you got Darth Vader, you could purchase Yoda as DLC and vice versa. So they were made available from them. Other than that, now you've seen from then on, there's no other characters that are like locked to that console. It's usually characters that are in other games and are promoted as such, so there's not really a big deal with that. And that's like the final criteria that they usually choose. That's why if you ever see me coming in the comment section, I'm not like trying to attack anybody when I'm saying that like this doesn't fall under their criteria. In a perfect world, we can have whatever guests we want, right? Like hell, let's have like Goku in SoulCalibur, but that's not really going to happen. And based on what they have done and what they are doing, and based on the sales of SoulCalibur 6, that's not something that they're going to look at doing in SoulCalibur 7. So that's why when we're choosing characters for SoulCalibur 7, we have to stick within the same criteria. Relevancy is also a big thing. I talk about that a lot when I'm talking in comments. Relevancy doesn't mean that it's not relevant. It means currently. So that like, is the game currently in production? Is it being promoted right now? Is it an upcoming title that needs promotion, or did it come out recently before the game came out and still is fresh enough that it can actually be promoted? Those are the three criteria for relevancy. It doesn't mean that the character that you're choosing is not important. So when I say that like a character there's not enough relevancy, I'm not saying that character's not relevant. I'm saying that like for them to cross promote, it would be a kind of pointless endeavor at that point. So before we end the video, I'm going to get to the poll of the last video, and what we actually talked about was, do you think dynamic arcade mode would entice you to put more time into it if it were implemented in SoulCalibur 7? 67%, the majority of people said yes, it sounds fun. 27% said maybe, depends on how. 4% said no, stay the same, and 2% said other, and you can see the comments here obviously, and this is at a pool of 208 votes, so thank you. If you want to see your comments and your votes, I do a poll at the end of every video in the community tab, so be sure to check that out. Any all thoughts are always welcome in the comment section down below, guys. You can also feel free to join the Discord, which the link is in the description box down below, and as I always say, guys, I love it, thank you,
and thank you.